Coming at you live again. And we have a guest that we're waiting to hear from. We're going to just go through the same list of essays that we were going through. So we'll wait for Kurtis. See if I can hurry this process up here. Okay. Should just be a few minutes or a few seconds. How are you guys doing? We're continuing on with S. Roane's set of essays. We will get through that. Probably we'll get through essay 2 and 3 today. We're going to speed it up. We got bogged down in the first part of 2 last time, talking about Marbury versus Madison. Hopefully you got something. Not Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland. If you recall that. That's a very important video. You want to make sure you get that. Okay. Kurtis, are you there?
Here I am. Howdy.
Hello.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you. So I was just saying we went through S. Roane's second essay. We got bogged down on McCulloch versus Maryland, which is very important, but we're going to continue through that. You want to just we stopped at the 14th Amendment, and this essay is again called Understanding Consolidation. And I guess I'll take some of the pressure off you, and I'll rehash what the McCulloch versus Maryland issue was. In this essay, he's detailing 4 key areas that power consolidated in the federal government throughout history. The first one was McCulloch versus Maryland, a United States Supreme Court decision in 1819. Again, this is S. Roane on the Substack. I've posted it. We'll post it in the comments again. I mean, it's nothing new. We've already posted it like 10 times. But it's called Understanding Consolidation. I'll show. So that's what it is. And we're going to get to all the way through this and then all the way through the third one, the Citizens Amendment, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We're going to try to do it in a half hour. So pray for us. Now, consolidation in the federal government of power, he believes was kicked off by McCulloch versus Maryland, which was the bank case. And in that case, the Supreme Court said that the necessary and proper clause could be used by Congress to create a national bank, and in doing so could provide a vehicle for Congress to do stuff, create agencies in the future that would be go beyond what was specifically mentioned in Article 1, Section 8, which are the limited duties and power, or the limited powers of Congress. And I recommend this book, The Federalist Papers, Charles Kessler. It's got a copy of the Constitution in the back, and you could look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And I will just list a few things that are mentioned there. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, so that's a very specific thing, to provide for the paying of debts, for the common defense and the general welfare, to coin money, to establish uniform rules of naturalization, to regulate commerce with foreign nations, borrow money, declare war, raise and support armies, support and maintain a navy. So these are very specific things. You go through that list and you won't see the bank, the power to create a bank. So one side of that was just livid that Congress had done this on the necessary and proper clause, and the necessary and proper clause, the wording of that, let me read that. It's in section 8, it's at the very end. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof.
Mm-hmm.
So, boom, you have a bank because Congress judged it to be necessary and proper to create a bank. Well, our author here, S. Roane, is saying that's horrifying because basically it gave Congress a blank check and negated the nature of limited government, which is enumerated powers. If there's one of those powers that lets you do anything, then what's the point of enumerated powers?
Right.
An enumerated power is something specific that's written down that you wouldn't have otherwise. You wouldn't have that power otherwise. So, so that's his view on that. We went into, I would suggest that you go to the previous video if you want that full discussion. We're not going to do it again here. Definitely not. And I don't even think I did a very good Guyvet Précis on that one, to be honest with you. But go check it out. So now we're on the 14th Amendment. He says this is the next one. The second event was the ratification of the 14th Amendment for consolidation of political of power in the federal government. And his complaint is that this was achieved effectively through coercion because the Civil War, as a condition of coming back into the Union after hostilities, the Civil War ended on the requirement that the southern states would ratify these amendments. When I say these amendments, I mean 13 and 14. The end of slavery and the ratification of the 14th Amendment. So, so what about that? Do you have any thoughts about that? I've been talking the whole time, so I guess I should let you talk.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm actually enjoying listening to you summarize this up.
Okay.
There is a concern about the coercion.
Okay.
I think. Obviously not so much with the 13th Amendment.
Well, wait, because you can't. If the issue of coercion would be the same for both amendments. So if coercion is an issue, it's an issue for both of those amendments.
Well, I think coercion is an issue.
Okay. So let's talk about that.
It in a sense, it seems to remake what the founders started with. I mean, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So it seems to either remove or seriously limit state rights in a way that it wasn't originally founded. It's what it seems to me on the face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair articulation of what he's saying here. I think what he's saying and what you're saying is that the just powers, he's quoting Lincoln here. Lincoln referred to the Declaration of Independence as the apple of gold, and the Union and the Constitution are the picture of silver, subsequently framed around it. It's a famous quote there. And footnote 11, I gotta look at I'm forgetting exactly where I've read that before, but footnote 11 will tell us, and that would be he doesn't cite it. He doesn't cite the exact thing. He cites the collection, but not the primary source. Okay.
Oh.
All right. Well, Lincoln was referring specifically to the Declaration's famous second paragraph, which states that man's inalienable rights must be secured by a government instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's the end of that quote. If consent was derived at the point of a gun, then the 14th Amendment is not legally ratified, and the federal government did not legitimately derive its just powers. So the idea is that just government and coercion of this kind are not compatible, I guess. This means that the powers derived from the 14th Amendment are not just and therefore not justiciable. That's kind of a big deal because the 14th Amendment is a big deal.
Yeah.
And if you undercut the 14th Amendment, then what about the 13th Amendment? That abolished slavery, right? And the 14th Amendment made the Bill of Rights applicable to the states. But previously, it was only applicable to the federal government. Did I lose you? Let's see if you're still there. See if we can get Kurtis back. Kurtis. Technical difficulties here, people. All right, well, I'll just continue on. I'll respond to what Kurtis said. I would say, as a Republican, because these are Republican amendments, and I never get tired of saying that, that it's perfectly compatible with the just powers of the consent of the governed to do this at the point of a gun, because the southern states were seceding, and I don't think they had a right to do that. And they confiscated federal property, for example, like Fort Sumter. That was a famous example. And as a condition of surrender for that rebellion, they did consent to the conditions for rejoining the Union, and I think that they were perfectly that's perfectly intelligible. I mean, otherwise you'd have to say that they didn't consent to surrender and end the Civil War, and I think that that's absurd. So I think that was just a matter of ending those hostilities. They lost, and they're the ones that took up arms against the United States to preserve slavery. And so during that time, slavery was abolished, and they had to agree to that. That was a big deal to come back in, because slavery was what caused the hostilities in the first place. So that's where I land on that. I hope that makes sense, and I don't have anybody asking if I don't have anybody on the other line here. So hopefully we'll have, I'm going to go on to the next one. The Interstate Commerce Act is the next one. It's the third one, 1887. And Roane's issue here is that it combines executive, judicial, and legislative powers into one hand, which was the very definition of tyranny, of despotic government in the Federalist Papers. These independent agencies do this. That's the problem. There's lots of independent agencies now, but the first one was the ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission. So the independent agencies blossomed under FDR and the New Deal, and uh, you had the passage of the Administrative Procedure Act, which was meant to curtail the power of these rule-making bodies. But the main issue is that the consolidation of power in a headless fourth branch of government that the executive cannot control violates separation of powers. That's a problem. The fourth event he mentions was the Supreme Court's opinion in Cooper versus Aaron. And that was in 1958 during the Warren era, Warren Court. Hi, I'm already almost through Cooper versus Aaron now.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right. Cooper versus Aaron was a case that you had Brown versus Board in 1954, that set of cases. Then you had Cooper versus Aaron 4 years later, which basically reiterated the ruling there, abolishing the segregation in public schools. And it was the dicta in Cooper versus Aaron. Dicta is, it's not part of the decision of the court. It's not part of the ruling, the law. Dicta is like extra stuff that they put in there. You know, and pretty much all court decisions have dicta. But he says the dicta in Cooper versus Aaron asserted judicial supremacy, which basically means that the Constitution is what the court says it is. It's not something different than that. It is so. In other words, you can't know what the Constitution means until the Supreme Court rules on it. And once the Supreme Court rules on it, even if the ruling appears to be at odds with the Constitution itself, if push comes to shove, the Supreme Court ruling, takes the place of the language of the Constitution. And that's Cooper versus Aaron summarized, the problem with it. Not the ruling of Cooper versus Aaron, but the dicta, the extra stuff that was in there. And that's an attitude of judicial supremacy, which a lot of people have adopted since then. They've kind of just absorbed it in their skin. And you'll hear a lot of people, when you talk politics or law or whatever, people often say, well, I'm not a lawyer. And what they mean by that is, I don't know how to think for myself. That's what they mean by that. What they mean by that is they haven't studied court decisions, which is what law school really is. Law school is not really about reading statutes. It's about reading court decisions. You're not reading Article 1 stuff. You're reading Article 3 stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Primarily. I mean, you do read statutes and stuff like that, of course.
They're basically
you have to.
reading. So if I'm clear on that, they're basically, instead of reading original source, they're reading decisions based on original.
Yeah. I mean,
kind of like.
Yeah. I mean, Brown versus Board of Education had some problems with it.
Yes.
And I can't go into that now. But if you read it, it's only like 9 or 11 pages or something like that. I mean, it's just the basis of the decision was social science data, not the Constitution. That's the first problem.
Right.
A constitutional decision that's not based on the language of the Constitution. There's a problem there. There's a problem there. A lot of people think that Brown versus Board of Education overruled Plessy versus Ferguson, but it didn't. It did no such thing. It did no such thing. Brown versus Board of Education was restricted to educational facilities. Plessy versus Ferguson was about transportation. That was about trains. Anyway, but okay, we can't go through that because we didn't give people the heads up and they can't read that. But I'm not sure. I don't know very many people that have actually read the decision very closely, let alone critiques of the decision. But Cooper versus Aaron's a big problem, I think. So I agree with him on that. I agree with him on Cooper versus Aaron. I agree with him on the independent agency stuff. I don't agree with him on the 14th Amendment, and I don't agree with him on Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland.
Right.
So I'm in partial agreement with him. He's really a libertarian, is what he is. So this is a very clear example of how a Republican would differ from a libertarian. I'm a Republican. So a Republican has no problem with McCulloch versus Maryland, or the 14th Amendment. Obviously, I mean, we Republicans were the ones that did the 14th Amendment. It's a Republican amendment. Totally with him on Cooper versus Aaron. Totally with him on the independent agency fiasco. So I think that pretty much summarizes well what we're going through here. I don't want to get too much into administrative law, but I would say that the last two of those things go together: the judicial supremacy issue and the administrative law issue. When I say administrative law, I mean independent agencies creating rules
That act
that becomes administrative law, because these rules are not passed by Congress, they're passed by administrative agencies. So that is called administrative law. And the Supreme Court has blessed that and said that's okay for them to do. We're not going to get involved with nitpicking that as much as Roane thinks that they should. And because of Cooper versus Aaron's judicial supremacy, whatever the Supreme Court says goes, well, you put those two things together, and now you have administrative agencies basically running amok over the lives of people. Let me give you one example that's not in this paper. HHS, Health and Human Services, came up with the controversial contraceptive mandate. That was not in Obamacare. If you read the text of the law in Obamacare, did I? No, I didn't, because it's 3,000 pages. But I listened to lawyers who did, and law professors who did. For example, Richard S. Epstein, who I think he's retired from Chicago now, but he has a law podcast called Law Talk, I think, with John Yoo, who teaches at Berkeley Law School. And the contraceptive mandate was not in the text of the statute. That was a creation entirely of the Obama HHS. That's where they sued Little Sisters of the Poor.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's a great example of that's an administrative agency creating a law that was not passed by Congress, requiring nuns to violate their conscience by participating in abortion, what they consider to be abortion, by funding an abortifacient. So, yeah.
Not good.
Yeah. Huge problem. Huge problem. I agree with that. Okay. You want to get to this third essay? Now we're doing the Citizens Amendment.
Yeah, so that
third essay.
That's a good way to sum up the four main points of how we got here. And now really the Citizens Amendment, it's a real short essay. particularly compared to the previous one. But basically, he wants to, in the third essay, he's saying, okay, so now we know how we got here. What do we do about it, right?
Right.
He starts out with asking why
Practicalities.
Yeah. And he tries to, I mean, basically he says that there isn't an incentive. In so many words, he says those in power aren't
Right.
incentivized to give it up. And so we need to look at other alternatives. If we can't, if they're not going to give it up and they're going to kind of lord it over us, so to speak, he points out that the Constitution in Article 5 has the ability, or has a provision for us to be able to do gather together a conglomeration of the states to be able to put an amendment by vote of the population onto the book, so to speak. And what he's proposing is to do that very thing, and do what's called a citizens amendment. And what he wants the citizens amendment to do is be very simple. He wants to, let's see, he says on the second page, an amendment to Article 5, he wants it to read like this. On the first national election following the ratification of the amendment, a question shall be placed on each ballot issued by each state asking, quote, should the Constitution of the United States be amended? And then 2 answer blocks to record yes or no. If a majority of the ballots in a state are recorded say yes, should the majority of the states in the union meet that threshold, then the following will take place. And then he goes on to explain how the scheme of doing this, if I can synopsize it, will allow citizens to be able to have it be very clear whether or not their elected officials are doing what they said they wanted done. And then if they're not doing it, it'll be obvious, because we're not watching all the little things that are going into the bills. We're not watching all the little stuff that's going on. And they're always, a lot of legislatures will slip all kinds of things into things they're passing. And we're not always aware of it. But if they're not following it, having this amendment in here will kind of be a red flag for the citizens to be able to know, okay, let's get these people out because they're not doing what we want. So let's change at the next election. That's kind of what he's getting at.
Right. So it's designed to, it's designed to put political pressure.
Yes.
On initially to have a convention of states. Not that anything has to be decided there, but that there is a discussion that takes place from the ground up. That's not top down, it's from the ground up.
Right.
So in other words, you get people involved in the language of the Constitution. You get people energized and the feeling that they have agency. I think the key part of this is that once it happens the first time, the very last part of that, following the first execution of this process, it shall be repeated. So you only need to do it once. And then it's automatic. I think he said every 10 years.
Yeah.
Every 10 years. And you'll have the same question. You'll have a question on, I guess, either the ballot or the census.
Right.
I guess it would be on the ballot, but because non-citizens fill out the census. So so then you'd have a regular convention of states like every 10 years. And if you do that, where the language is focused on the text of the Constitution, then you have average people from the ground up coming and arguing for and against various provisions that they want changed. And that means, of course, you have to read the actual Constitution that exists right now, because otherwise, how would you know what you want to change?
Right.
he crucially says this would not alter anything else in Article 5 or Amendment 5, or not Amendment 5, Article 5 of the Constitution, which puts a pretty high bar on amending it. I mean, you have to get 3/4 of the states, 2/3 of Congress, both houses, right? It's 2/3 of Congress, right?
Right.
Is it 2/3 or is it?
Yeah, it was going to be something like 38 states would have to.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a pretty big hurdle, I
And
think.
I was,
So,
when I first read this, I thought, oh my goodness, this is great. This is the way, or a way to put power back, give people power. And
mhm.
and then I started doing some research and looking around, and I talked to a representative here local to me, and what I realized after doing a little digging is the only my only objection to this isn't really an objection. I mean, it's fine to pursue something like this, but I actually think there's a much more expedient way of getting at the very principle he's trying to establish. I think it's already there, really, and really it's already there in a way that's much more frequent than 10 years and much more regularly accessible to all of us. And that's getting involved in your local election process. So this one lawyer was telling me that he said statistically, if you go to your precinct, odds are less than half of your precinct positions are filled with, which are volunteer positions. Anybody can step in and fill them. Less than half of them are filled. So odds are pretty.
If they were paid, they'd probably be filled.
Oh, right, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's so pretty good odds that you could get involved and bring about, at least have a voice in your local precinct. And if all that, if you can imagine that half all got filled all of a sudden, if everybody all at once went, oh my goodness, half the Republican Party volunteers at the precinct level aren't filled, we're going to all go fill them. That's a serious voice that can be had at the ground level. And those positions are a lot more powerful in total than people realize. I think that's the grind of things that people tend to be like, well, you go once a month, it's a volunteer position, maybe you're not really seeing.
Well, let me ask you this. What, did I lose you, Kurtis? You froze up on me. Okay, Kurtis. Well, let me just respond to what you said. Although you're not going to be able to see this, possibly. Let me see if I can get through to you. Okay. Well, let me respond to that, and hopefully we can make sense of this. I think you can do both. I think you should be involved with local politics, and we can do the convention of states. What I like about this is that it gets people energized. And that brings us to the possible objection he deals with. And that is that the objection is that this is going to be a cluster F. If you have a convention of states, from the ground up, like a grassroots kind of thing, that the concern would be that it's a runaway convention and crazy things are proposed and you can't walk yourself back from that. So that's the objection. And the way he meets that objection is by saying that you still have the high bar for amending the Constitution that's in Article 5. That's not changed. What's changed is just this mechanism of quote unquote returning power to the people. Now, I did want to, before I forget, where did I put that? Let me guess, I put it behind me. I did want to mention something. Oh, where's it? I did want to mention one thing. Oh, there it is. About the second essay that we didn't mention, that I thought he should have mentioned as part of the consolidation of political power, and that is the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment. And I've been working through this book. I want to show you this book. This book, Federalism, the Supreme Court, and the 17th Amendment by Ralph Rossum, who was my chair of my dissertation in constitutional law. He teaches at Claremont McKenna College. This is a great book, and this is really challenging me on my prior assumptions on federalism and the role of the court. He's basically saying here that the court has no legitimate role in enforcing federalism because the 17th Amendment altered the structure of federalism, altered the structure of our government, because it took away the mode of election of the Senate by the states, and it put the mode of election of the Senate into the hands of the people. And that meant that the states themselves, and he goes through this in this chapter right here, the states protected, the framers protected by federalism primarily by giving states the power to use U.S. senators. That was the original design, and it was altered by the 17th Amendment. So the U.S. senators are not beholden to the states as states because of that amendment. And I really thought it was odd. Now that I'm reading this book, it's a little odd that he left that out of his four things that consolidated political power in the federal government. Because, and maybe he left it out because it is kind of an irony of constitutional democracy, as Ralph Rossum says, that the irony is that this consolidation of political power in the federal government seemed to be a grassroots effort, because the 17th Amendment was the crucial thing protecting states as states, and that was abolished according to Ralph Rossum. I'm still working through the book. I'm going to let you know what I think about it. It's pretty carefully argued, and I'm trying to wiggle through some of his arguments. So that's where I'm at. I'll let you know. Well, hopefully this was enlightening to you as you work through these essays. The next essay we have is essay 4, The Threat of Socialism. And we're going to have another philosophy guy on who's also a medical professional. We're going to have him on to discuss that. Also a military veteran. And we'll have this military veteran that's going to be the next guy coming on. He knows a lot. He's is focused on communism, just like I did. When I was in the military, we're both linguists, both went to Talbot School of Theology, Biola University, and studied philosophy there, and we both did foreign language stuff in the military. He was in the Army, Vietnamese. And so Vietnam, obviously communist country. Mine was Chinese. China, obviously communist country. So we have a specific concern about socialism and communism. And so he's going to help us unpack the fourth one on the socialist threat. Then we're moving on. We're probably going to do God, Guns in America, Mike Austin's stuff. That definitely needs to be addressed. That's I think he's the current president of the EPS, Evangelical Philosophical Society, and he holds the Democratic Party's issues with the Second Amendment, and we're going to have to unpack, Christian Democrats, and we're going to target that specifically on guns. We'll also have our medical professional back to talk about vaccines. Ooh, and we'll